when Kathy called me about being on this panel, I thought, oh yeah, this is great because I've spent quite a long time working on this project. It'll be really easy to do. And then when I really started working on this talk, what I was going to say and not get into the minutia but show the complexity, it's been a bit of a challenge, and my talk is way too long and now we're behind, so I'm just going to blast through this, I guess. But as I've been listening to these other speakers, I just think of more things to say instead of less things to say, so I apologize in advance. But the Sustainable Ag Farming Systems Project, to put it in some personal perspective, I signed the first grant proposal when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, who's going to be 23 next month. So it's very easy for me to remember the beginning of this, when the beginning of this project was. And many of the researchers who were involved from the very beginning are still involved in the project, and really nobody has left the project other than to retire or to go to a different university. So that says something about the project, I think, in and of itself. But I have to mention that originally in 1988, when we started this project, the first 12, actually 13 years of the project were at a different location than it is now at. And I just, I know this session is not supposed to be about the problems of or theoretical or philosophical issues about long-term research, but I can't help but talk about some of those challenges and how it kind of explains why this talk was hard to do, because I think, well, what period of time am I supposed to be talking about? And this is, oh, I'm glad you can see it better than I can. This is the research area. Those are the Blue Hills. This is the Central Valley of California near Sacramento, just west of 7 miles west of the Davis campus. The mountains you see in the background are the Blue Ridge, and on the other side of that is Napa Valley. And you also, on the left, you can see there's a riparian area that's Pewter Creek that runs into the Sacramento River. So anyway, just to give you a feel of, this is a laser leveled area. Everything's irrigated. It's kind of a picturesque setting. It's very photogenic. And then just kind of a history of staffs at the Russell Ranch. Staffs relocated to the Russell Ranch in 2003. The Russell Ranch was purchased by UC Davis in 1992. It was set up with 2-year rotations, and so when we were at the other site, we had a 4-year rotation. When we moved to the Russell Ranch, we went to a 2-year rotation. And I just bring that up because another thing I want to add to my talk is that, if nothing else, that all of this needs to be, I think we need to always be thinking about organic in terms of rotation, 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 rotation. One of the problems, I think, with, well, not problems, but when John Reginald was speaking this morning about his matched farms, the organic, he was not able to match the rotations because conventional strawberry growers grow strawberries after strawberries after strawberries because they fumigate with methyl bromide and chlorpicrin and other pretty nasty stuff that's either, you have the choice between depleting the ozone or a carcinogen, and that's kind of your choice in fumigants. And whereas an organic strawberry grower cannot grow continuous strawberries and has to have a rotation. And so when you're looking at organic, and I was interested in the previous talk because I'm wondering what they're growing in rotation with the cotton. Anyway, what we grow and where we grow it is going to be influenced by how much organic grows is going to influence what we grow and where we grow it because of the requirements of rotation. And just as we don't have a one-on-one substitution for fertilizers and pesticides, we don't have a one-on-one substitution for crops. You don't just take the organic strawberry, the conventional strawberry land, and convert it to organic strawberries. So now I'm really going to be over. So the SAF system, I'm focusing on 2007, the 2003 to 2007 period. The organic rotation was cover crop tomatoes, and when I say tomatoes, I'm talking about processing tomatoes that go into ketchup and pizza, and canned tomatoes and soup, not fresh market tomatoes, which is a whole different animal that you put on your salads. Corn, I'm talking about field corn and Then we had the low input system that also has a cover crop in between crops, and the conventional system that has no cover crop. And one of the big challenges, of course, when we, not of course, but we have with processing tomatoes is that processing tomatoes are all grown under contract, and those contracts specify delivery dates, and so it's very unusual compared to a lot of other crops. And so really conventional growers start planting tomatoes as early as February. Now, following a cover crop, we have not been able to have enough biomass from the cover crop and then also have early planted tomatoes. So kind of artificially push the planting date to May for both, even though the conventional would be some of the conventional would be planted earlier. And I just bring that up again as to the complexity of once you get a cover crop, then the timing of operations becomes an issue. We also have looked at different tillage systems, standard tillage and conventional tillage, and I'll just split that, but skip quickly through that. The big difference between the two systems is the fertility. The organic, the tomato organic and low input systems used a cover crop. Prior to 2004, there was only a cover crop in the organic and low input corn, and then we started having a cover crop before all the tomato crops. Chicken manure in the organic tomatoes and corn, and then synthetic nitrogen judiciously in the tomatoes, the low input tomatoes, higher inputs of course in the conventional tomatoes, and then in the conventional corn, but not in the low input corn. And here's just a detail, I'll just skip that. Here's a picture of our cover crop because Scott told me he had a lot of photos, so I thought I should have a lot of photos. But I think you're familiar with, and we've played around with a lot of different cover crops as well over the years. We actually started out with lupins, which didn't do particularly well. We've also gone from mowing to chopping the cover crop to initiating dry down prior to incorporation. So just to give you an idea that all of this keeps evolving and changing, and we're always kind of struggling with what needs to stay the same so that the experiment makes sense over time and what needs to be evolving with better management practices. The most extreme case of that is really that we started out with direct seeding of tomatoes, and then the industry really moved to transplanting, so we had to make that big decision of moving to transplanting of the tomatoes. Here's more pictures of the cover crops and incorporation. Weed control, very different. And Kathleen Delott made the point this morning that whether or not there's more labor in terms of, particularly in terms of hand hoeing, depends on whether it's a horticultural crop or not. And as an economist, I would say it has to do with the value of the crop. And in other studies that we've looked at with, at a wide range of crops in California, really if no organic crops are hand weeded unless the conventional crop is also hand weeded, but the hand weeding is much higher in organic. So in other words, in conventional corn, there's no hand weeding, and in organic corn, there's no hand weeding either. The cultivations are higher, of course, and there's no herbicide in the organic, and the low input has a judicious use of herbicides. And we really didn't have we haven't had many pests over time. We actually haven't used any pesticides in 2007 anyway for corn, and just a couple of treatments in the tomatoes in 2007. So the cost of production. So when you put this all together, then you see that for tomatoes, you see that hugely higher cost for weed control, and that's primarily the hand weeding. For the corn, you see that since there's more in fertility, because the fertility cost has the cover crop, and actually most of the fertility cost is the manure, but there's less in weed control because there's no herbicide. So the corn is much more similar in cost than the tomatoes, and you see, of course, the tomatoes are much more expensive to produce than corn. Here's kind of some pie charts of the costs, and you see that big orange fertility cost there on the organic side for the corn. And you look at, and then it's really the same information presented differently as a bar chart. And you see that the planting cost is higher for the conventional than the organic because it's Roundup Ready corn, and we did not use organic corn seed. First I looked at that and thought it was a mistake, and oh yeah, it's because it's Roundup Ready. And I'm not sure which year we switched over to Roundup Ready, but 60 to 70% of the corn in this area is Roundup Ready, so we decided to go with that. Again, a big decision at the research station whether or not to do that. Tomatoes, planting is higher for the organic tomatoes than for the conventional tomatoes, so the opposite result than for the corn because we did use organic transplants. And so you see here the differences, the fertility being higher for organic because of the manure, for the poultry manure, and the planting being higher planting being higher because of the organic transplants, and weed control being higher because of the hand weeding. Revenue. I thought I'd take the opportunity to show you some pictures of what the tomato harvester is, because I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember or heard about the controversy over the tomato harvester that was developed at the University of California. The University of California was actually sued for the development of the tomato harvester because it put people out of work, which seems ironic now because of labor shortages in agriculture. But anyway, this is the famous tomato harvester. Here you see the side rails there for people to stand, and the tomatoes go up this conveyor. There's different kinds, but the tomatoes go up, and there are people. I couldn't get some good pictures of. There are about 4 to 6 people standing inside this machine that's being pulled, that's self-propelled. And the tomatoes go up here and they go in here, and there's an electronic eye that's sorting the tomatoes, and then there are several people standing and they're actually sorting out green tomatoes. And now the newer machines don't even have people sorting. It's all by electronic eye. And also one of the other innovations is they actually shred the vines as they go back out the other end, so they're easier to incorporate and decompose later on. So there's lots of innovations going on. Here's another picture of it jumping into these trailers, and at certain times of year in California when you're driving on the back roads, you're always squishing tomatoes, or you see a little pile of tomatoes that escaped on the side of the road, and you know it's tomato season. Okay, when we look at the yields then for the tomatoes, so the CT is conservation tillage, ST is standard tillage. We see that, well, let's just breeze through this, that the low input had the lowest yields. Standard tillage had higher yields on average, except with the conventional. So every statement you make, there's an except to sort of, it's hard to make sweeping generalizations. And then just for 2007, the standard tillage was higher in all systems, but the yields were not significantly different. With corn, it's a very different story. The low input organic yields have been lower from the get-go, and we can't really figure out, we never have really figured out why. We've had germination problems. We've tried longer periods of time after the cover crop and before planting. Some people think that's the problem. 2007 things were better, but still significantly lower for the low input. And then I've been keeping track of the organic and conventional prices over time. And somehow I missed 2 years, and this is the first time I've actually tried to put this together into a graph. But you can see that the premium, so what's important when you look at the market and the profitability is when you talk about processing tomatoes, California is all she wrote. And so really the price is determined by the production in California. And you see that back in the early days, the price premiums started out higher to try to lure farmers into organic tomato production. Then the premiums kind of fell off, and now they're getting a little higher, but you see they pretty much follow the pattern of conventional prices. With corn, it's another story. Organic corn, California is a very small part of the big picture, and so kind of when things go bad elsewhere, it's good for us and in terms of price. So those prices have really been all over the map. So we look at net returns. For processing tomatoes, the organic net returns are actually the highest because of those price premiums, even though the yields have been a little bit lower, followed by conventional, and then the low input having the lowest yields and not benefiting from the premium prices. For corn, it looks a little different. The organic, even with the price premiums, the yields were so much lower that the net returns were still higher for conventional than organic, although organic was similar. So it's just a very different market. Then in terms of labor hours, machine hours, actually very, very similar between the two. Organic and conventional, it's really the hand labor that's dramatically different because we had less pesticide applications, but we have additional operations for the cover crop and for spreading manure. So the fuel consumption, very similar but higher for organic tomatoes and higher for conventional corn because of the pesticide operations. Water use, the organic actually uses more water because of the better water infiltration. So this is all furrow irrigated, and it takes more water to get across the field, and the water kind of penetrates more, so you really need to be pushing, more water. Just a repeat of the nitrogen. Here's the sources of the nitrogen for the corn crop. So you see the half of it coming from the cover crop and half of it coming from manure, and the low input being woefully low on nitrogen, and why we didn't throw a little cheap nitrogen on the low input is beyond me. I actually asked a few people, said, I don't know, it wasn't my decision. I don't know. Anyway, tomatoes, the organic actually has more nitrogen, and you see we did put some synthetic fertilizer on the low input tomatoes. But when you look at the balances then, there's more loss of nitrogen in the organic system than any of the other either of the other two systems. More nitrogen in and less nitrogen out. Same thing with the, so that was corn, sorry, same thing with the tomatoes. And then when you look at there's more nitrogen stored in the soil, but there's still a greater nitrogen loss in the organic system. Nitrous oxides, this was similar to the other studies where the greenhouse gas emissions when there's a cover crop are higher. I'm just going to skip all this. There's more runoff when there's no cover crop. The top is a field that had no cover crop, and the bottom is the field with a cover crop, so there's less water runoff, less herbicide runoff. Water quality, there's more, yeah, skip all that. Because I want to get to my sweeping generalizations. Anyway, just to give you an idea that there's a lot of this and other stuff going on in terms of research on these plots. So, sweeping generalization about organic agriculture, what do we learn from this? At least this is California. I'm very myopic when it comes to my view of organic agriculture. Relies on cover crops, compost, and sometimes liquid fertilizers. Fertility costs more than for conventional. This is just true. Beyond this project. All of these things are things that are true beyond this project. Only crops that rely on hand hoeing for weed control use hand hoeing in organic. When used, labor costs for hand hoeing are higher than for conventional. There's fewer pest and disease control tools available for organic than conventional. Some crops are easier to grow organically than others. And here again, when we're talking about rotations, and if organic, as organic increases, what we're going to grow and where we're going to grow it is going to necessarily change. Organic price premiums vary from crop to crop, but are not trending downward over time. as organic expands. So that's the good news. And then cover crops are just a very big part of what we are doing. They may delay planting in spring. They may replace a cash crop in a rotation. They do reduce winter runoff, improve the quality of winter runoff in terms of pesticides and fertilizers moving from the field, increase carbon sequestration, may increase greenhouse gas emissions. They provide habitat and reduce erosion. So other things, you know, the complexity of of organic as a system is what I'm trying to get across, and I think some of these long-term experiments where we're forcing things to be side by side I think we've lost some of the art of the organic systems. That's it. And she's not even flashing me.